Okay, so the point of the one leg drill ultimately is to organize the body in such a way that it can force all of its momentum into this whip arm into a mature, deep hit point. Which, like, the word mature there is kind of convoluted, but once you start to understand the stuff, that word makes a lot of sense. And it comes from kind of whip mechanics. If you've ever actually physically cracked a whip before, you can't just go like and make it work. It's a thing that takes time to develop, and that you have to throw a coil out, let that one mature, and then throw another coil and get them both to line up at the same time. That's what creates, you know, accelerated movement that creates a sonic boom. It's two big force waves lining up at the same time, and they have to be done slowly and thoughtfully. You can't rush it. It doesn't work. So that's why I've kind of landed on the term mature hit point when I'm explaining my ideas on this topic. So ultimately the one drill is to set up that, getting a good hit point. Along the way, what we need to do is calibrate the swing plane so that it can be simple, so that we can send these whip mechanics down the arm and set ourselves up for as much success as possible. A lot of pros do a lot of weird things with their arm where they like are whipping in 3 dimensions. We don't want to do that while we're learning. We want to learn in a simple, controlled environment and then take that understanding and move it into a more biomechanical, advantageous position if we want to. A lot of folks will find they don't need to. They can just throw like a trebuchet or a robot, and that gets them to 400 feet and they're happy. They don't need to do anything to make more lat activation or anything else. Totally up to you. Choose your own adventure. But I will help you find that hit point feeling for the first time, hopefully. So that's overarching theory stuff. Lower level theory stuff. The one leg drill is just a balance and centered rotation calibration. So it's not a power move. It's not a how far can you throw the disc. It's not how fast can you throw the disc. It's can you throw centered? Can you keep your balance? So a centered throw does not look like this. That's an off balance, uncentered throw. A centered throw looks like this. My head to my rear foot is an axis of rotation. Those pieces are both going to stay in place. I'm going to lift my rear hip, drop my rear hip, have a powerful move, and end in balance without my head or my rear foot moving. That's the most common mistake that people make the first time I give them this drill. They, for some reason, float their rear foot up in the air, and then they do something like this to try and make the hip move faster. It does make the hip move faster. It's a good adaptation for that, but it does not teach the balance and the range of motion in the front hip that we want. So, from the beginning, mechanically, how to do this drill. Stand on one foot, turn that foot about 30 degrees backwards. This will vary depending on your internal rotation bias or external rotation bias. This is internal rotation bias. I have this one. This is external rotation bias. Brody Smith has this one. If you don't seem like you have a strong pull either way, particularly, so you should be reasonably comfortable 20 or 30 degrees toe back from 90 degrees from your line. Turn your toe back 20, 30 degrees. Put your weight in your heel of that foot. Feel like you're trying to do a hamstring stretch, trying to close a car door with your right glute. So you're like stretching your hamstring, getting the weight into the heel. Then put your rear foot as much as you can on a straight line with your spine. So that's your setup. And what you're using for the power source of this drill, you're making everything straight, linear, up and down. So you're using gravity and the post of your front leg resisting. Front leg does not have to move. Should not rotate, should not bend, should not rotate and bend forward, should just stay there. When I do this drill in these pants, it looks like my knee moves. It's really just my pants. My knee pretty much stays there. But here, it looks like the knee moves. This is my pant leg moving around my knee, just for clarity. So, 30 degrees toe back, weight in the heel, feeling that hamstring stretch. Extend the rear leg behind you, leave the rear leg on the ground. Put the toe on the ground, put just the weight of maybe your calf on the ground just for balance. Head stays where it is. Power source, rear hip. Rotate the hips 45 degrees, lifting the rear hip up and then dropping it to neutral. That's your calibration. Drop to neutral and then drop 45 degrees below neutral. So this tends to make you lean back a little bit. That's not ideal, but it happens in this drill because our center of gravity has to shift forward a little bit in order to keep your center, well, your front hip has to shift forward in order to keep your center over your foot. So that's it. That's the drill. 45 degrees, 45 degrees. And you're kind of building in that feeling of pushing with the knee towards the front glute in a plane. Don't do that yet. Don't extend the knee, just leave the knee locked. So what you're doing is you're getting the pelvis to rotate around the front hip socket. Boom, boom. And it's just that little impulse of gravity being opposed by the front leg being a post that creates rotation. If my front leg is not a post and my front leg is allowed to bend, I lift the rear hip, drop the rear hip, no rotation happens. Rotation happens because this is dropping while this is held in place. Boom, boom. So that torque, that push and pull of gravity, boom, is what creates hip torque. That's using ground force to create hip torque. The way that most beginner players throw is like this, where they're opening the rear hip with the rear foot to create hip torque. That works to an extent, but that has a ceiling where at some point you cannot do that fast enough for it to get you to 400 feet. So you are using ground force, but you're using ground force on the rear leg. This is ground force on the front leg. So here's a one leg drill, everything is straight up and down. When I add momentum to that, now everything's not straight up and down anymore. It's my push from my leg is coming this way. And this hip, which was previously dropping straight down, is now dropping forward and down. So all of my momentum from my run up is still in this hip and is going to carry over, but now the vectors are aligned this way. So my horizontal run up speed can be stopped by the front leg, and it's like doing a pole vault, right? I'm stopping everything and changing it to a rotation, except now I'm going to pole vault sideways. Stupid, but it works as an explanation. So if I run, plant this here, and then I guess it would be that way. I don't know. I need to figure this out. But if I put this in the ground here, it's going to torque my hips, basically. So your front leg is your pull, and this is going to push on the ground and make this hip go that way and clear, and this hip is going to crumple forward. So you're going to get boom, and it's going to cause a hip switch. It's going to cause your pelvis and your front leg to fold into each other. Pelvis and front leg to fold into each other. Same thing here. So this is just a simplified environment to learn what we're going to do later in an active and dynamic brace. Okay, so if that wasn't enough theory, I don't know what is. So how do you actually do this? Toes 30 degrees back, knee locked, knee not rotating. Front hip socket will drift forward a little bit just because you're balanced. Don't worry about that. It doesn't matter. It does screw up your balance, but we'll fix that later. So keep your elbow on your plane. So practice the plane thing first, and then practice this one leg drill once you have the arm kind of sort of on lockdown a little bit, or at least some awareness of it. I recommend doing this with a fanning disc. Just keeps your elbow a little bit safer. So elbow up on the plane, toe 30 degrees back, knee locked, weight in the heel, a little bit of weight in the rear leg. Lift the rear hip 45 degrees, allow a reach back to happen. Drop while driving, drop the rear hip while mechanically connecting your elbow to your shoulder rotation, even driving it forward as you're rotating. You already do a good job of that. You have a good elbow drive. Let that happen as the hips rotate. So everything starts at once. It's not hips and then arm, hips and arm same time. Be aware of doing it at a rate where the disc wants to curl in on its own, not because you're doing it, but because you're going at a speed where your elbow being driven forward makes the disc curl in, and your elbow being driven forward more makes the disc curl out. That's starting to build an awareness of this hip point thing. So, for example, the mic picks this up pretty well. If I do an early release, where I'm not really getting a hip point, even if I do it kind of fast, it doesn't make a ton of sound. If I get to a mature hit point, there's a lot of sound. It's kind of one way that you know you're doing it right, if you happen to have a sensitive microphone available. So I think that's a pretty good primer on the one leg.